I told my boyfriend we should open the relationship, but only on my side because he is too immature to handle an open relationship. He said yes, even offered to leave the house empty for my first encounter, but it was a trap and he actually brought my parents to the house. I've always felt that Mark, my boyfriend, is a wonderful person, but let's be honest, he's a bit of a light version of a partner. While I've spent years deconstructing my ego and exploring the vast landscapes of modern sociology, Mark is the kind of man who finds a buy one, get one free coupon on detergent a thrilling weekend highlight. Our bond was stable, sure, but it lacked that intellectual electricity I crave to truly feel alive in a partnership. I've reached a level of emotional maturity where I can separate physical exploration from domestic stability, a feat I knew Mark simply wasn't equipped for yet. He's very traditional, which is just a polite way of saying he hasn't done the internal work required to handle the complexities of a truly progressive lifestyle. The relationship was starting to feel like a pair of shoes that were perfectly comfortable but terribly out of fashion. I realized that for me to stay, I needed a growth opportunity that didn't involve teaching him how to use a French press for the 10th time. I decided to propose a one-sided open relationship, a structured hierarchy that would allow me to bring fresh energy back into our home. I explained to him, very calmly and with a lot of patience, that because I have a higher emotional intelligence, I can navigate outside connections without losing my way. He, on the other hand, is far too impulsive and emotionally clunky to handle such a thing without it becoming a complete disaster. It was actually a protective measure on my part, a way to keep him safe from his own inevitable jealousy and lack of nuance. To my absolute shock, Mark didn't fight me on it at all. He just nodded as if I were explaining the grocery list. He told me he understood my need for expansion and said he wanted me to feel supported in my journey of self-discovery. It was a rare moment of clarity for him, and I felt quite proud of the work I'd put into elevating him, to a point where he could even grasp the concept. He even went as far as to suggest that I have my first date with Julian, a very sophisticated architect I'd been chatting with, right at our apartment. Mark said he wanted me to feel secure and at home for such a pivotal moment in our new chapter. It seemed like the ultimate gesture of a man finally understanding his place in a superior woman's life. I spent the entire afternoon preparing the atmosphere, curating every detail to reflect the new me I was debuting. I bought a $120 bottle of Cabernet, the kind with notes of leather and tobacco that Mark usually complains tastes like burnt wood. I arranged the lighting to be dim but intentional, setting out 3 delicate wine glasses because I thought Mark might want to toast to my evolution before he left. It was about aesthetics and energy, 2 things Mark has always struggled to appreciate. He watched me prepare with a strange, quiet smile that I mistook for genuine admiration. I truly believed he was finally seeing the value in my specialized brand of honesty. Mark left about an hour early, giving me a quick peck on the cheek and wishing me a transcendent evening. I felt so empowered standing there in my $300 silk robe, knowing I had successfully negotiated a life that catered to my specific needs without destroying my safety net. The silence of the apartment felt like a canvas ready for Julian's arrival. I checked my reflection one last time, making sure my intellectual but accessible look was perfect. I was about to embark on a journey that most women are too scared to even dream of. It's a shame the world isn't ready for women who know their worth and how to claim it. 10 minutes before Julian was scheduled to arrive, I heard the key turn in the lock. I assumed Julian was early, which I found slightly gauche, but I was prepared to be gracious about it. I stood in the center of the living room, wine glass in hand, ready to welcome him into my curated world. But the door didn't swing open to reveal a tall, brooding architect. Instead, Mark walked in, looking far too chipper for someone who was supposed to be hiding in a movie theater or a bar. My heart did a weird little flip, not out of guilt since I had permission, but out of annoyance that he was messing up the timing. The real blow came a split second later when 2 more figures stepped into the entryway behind him. It was my parents, looking stiff, uncomfortable, and devastatingly conservative in their Sunday best. My mother's eyes immediately landed on my silk robe, which was admittedly a bit more open than she's used to seeing at a casual family visit. My father's gaze shifted to the table, where the expensive wine and 3 glasses were laid out like a pagan altar. The air in the room instantly turned cold, and for the first time in my life I felt the sharp sting of someone else's complete lack of tact. Mark didn't look bothered at all. In fact, he was holding a store-bought cake as if this were a spontaneous birthday party. "Surprise!" he chirped, his voice dripping with a fake enthusiasm that was honestly insulting to my intelligence. He walked right past me to set the cake on the table right next to my carefully chosen Cabernet. My parents stayed by the door, looking like they had just walked into a crime scene. I stood there, frozen, trying to process how Mark could be so incredibly dense as to invite them over at this exact moment. It was a catastrophic failure of social awareness on his part. Since Chloe wanted to celebrate a new stage in our life, I thought her parents should be part of the joy, Mark said, gesturing toward me as if I were a museum exhibit. My mother made a small, choked-off sound in the back of her throat, and my father just stared at the floor. It was a blatant ambush, a low-brow tactic used by people who can't handle a real adult conversation. Mark knew exactly what I was doing that night, and instead of being a man about it, he chose to weaponize my family's outdated morals. He was trying to shame me for a lifestyle choice he had already consented to. The evening was a complete disaster from that point on, a whirlwind of stuttered explanations and heavy silences. Mark sat there like the perfect son-in-law, cutting slices of cake and offering them to my parents while I tried to wrap my robe tighter around my dignity. He kept looking at me with this innocent expression that made me want to scream. It was clear he hadn't actually agreed to the open relationship he had merely been looking for, a way to punish me for my autonomy. Chose a public semi-public humiliation over the intellectual growth I had generously offered him. I've never felt so betrayed by someone's lack of sophistication. He used my parents as human shields because he was too immature to tell me he was intimidated by my desires. Now, I'm stuck dealing with the fallout of his petty little stunt while he acts like he did something noble. It's honestly exhausting being the only person in a relationship who understands the concept of personal freedom. He thinks he won some sort of moral victory, but all he really did was prove that he's not ready for a woman of my caliber. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, so you basically told your boyfriend, I'm going to cheat and you're going to watch, and you're mad he called your parents? That's not intellectual depth, that's just a massive ego. Oopsie reply, it's called a structured hierarchy. I was protecting him from the emotional messiness he clearly can't handle, as evidenced by his childish little surprise. Anonymous user 2 says, why on earth did he bring the parents though? That's such a specific nuclear move. Ops reply, because Mark is a coward who uses emotional biological weapons. He knew he couldn't win an argument against my logic, so he brought in reinforcements to do his dirty work for him. Update 1. It's been 3 days since my last update, and the atmosphere in this apartment is thicker than the silence at a funeral. My parents didn't leave that night for 4 grueling hours, and they spent every second of it staring at me with a mixture of pity and horror. They barely touched the cake, and they certainly didn't touch the wine, which was a waste of a perfectly good vintage. Mark, the perfect partner, kept nudging the conversation toward my new philosophy, practically begging me to explain the progressive dynamics to them. I had to pivot constantly, weaving a desperate web about a themed mystery dinner that Julian, who I had to pretend was just a mutual friend, was supposed to help host. I was forced to lie through my teeth just to keep my mother from having a literal heart attack right there on my rug. Every time I tried to change the subject, Mark would bring it back, asking questions like, tell him about the part where the rules only apply to one person, honey. It's so fascinating. My father just grunted and looked at the wine glasses as if they were evidence in a murder trial. It was a masterclass in passive aggression from a man I thought was too simple for such maneuvers. He wasn't just being a jerk, he was actively trying to dismantle my reputation in front of the people whose opinions still unfortunately carry weight in my life. Julian kept texting me the whole time, his notifications popping up on the coffee table for everyone to see. My dad has the eyes of a hawk when he's suspicious, and I could see him reading the name Julian every time the screen lit up with a, where are you? I'm outside, message. I had to pretend it was a work emergency, but nobody was buying it. The tension was so high I thought the windows might shatter. Mark just sat there, sipping water and looking like he had just won the lottery. He didn't help me once. He just watched me drown in the situation he created. By the time they finally left, my mother was in tears, convinced that I was having some kind of manic episode. She kept talking about how I've been working too hard and how my brain must be muddled by all those modern books I read. She actually had the audacity to suggest that I move back home for a few weeks to heal and get my head straight. It's insulting that she thinks my quest for personal fulfillment is a mental health crisis. Mark, of course, just nodded along, saying he just wants what's best for Chloe's stability. He's a vulture circling my autonomy, waiting for me to fail so he can feel superior. Mark has been sleeping on the couch since that night, which is fine by me because I can't stand the sight of his smug face. He hasn't apologized, and he hasn't even tried to explain why he felt the need to involve my parents in our private relationship discussions. When I tried to confront him, he just said he thought radical honesty should include the whole family since I'm so big on transparency. He's literally using my own vocabulary to mock me. It proves he never had the depth to understand the concepts I was teaching him. He only learned the words so he could use them as weapons. The silence between us is punctuated only by his occasional humming or the sound of him making coffee as if nothing is wrong. He's acting like the victim of a confusing situation, but he was the architect of this entire ambush. He chose a sneak attack over a mature dialogue because he knew his arguments wouldn't hold up in a real debate. It's the ultimate sign of immaturity running to mommy and daddy because your girlfriend wants to live a life that's more exciting than yours. He's holding on to his good guy image with both hands, but I see the malice underneath it. I feel like I'm living in a prison of his making, where every move I make is being judged by the ghost of my parents' disappointment. My mom calls me every 2 hours to check in, which is really just a code for make sure you haven't invited any more architects over. It's stifling and regressive, and it's exactly what Mark wanted. He wanted to tie me down with guilt because he couldn't keep me with his personality. It's a pathetic move from a man who claims to love me. Julian hasn't texted me back since I tried to explain what happened, probably because he thinks I'm some kind of drama queen with a crazy family. Mark has effectively ruined a potentially life-changing connection for me. He's like a child who breaks a toy because he doesn't want anyone else to play with it. Except the toy is my life, and he's the one who's supposed to be my partner. I'm starting to realize that his simplicity was actually just a lack of character. I'm currently looking for a way to flip the script, but it's hard when your own mother is scouting out wellness retreats for you. Mark thinks he's won this round, but he's forgotten that I'm the one who defines the rules of this game. He can play the martyr all he wants, but I know the truth. He's just a small man who's afraid of a big life. And I'm not going to let him shrink mine just because he's uncomfortable. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says theme night. For a silk robe and 3 glasses of wine? You're lucky they didn't call an ambulance right then and there. Ops reply I had to lower my frequency so they wouldn't suffer from the truth of my evolution. They aren't ready for my reality, and Mark knew that, which makes his behavior even more predatory. Anonymous user 2 says Mark is a legend for this. He played the perfect son-in-law while lighting the fuse on your whole mess. Ops reply he's not a legend. He's a master manipulator of senior citizens. Using my parents' fragile traditionalism against me is the lowest form of emotional warfare. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update, and I've spent most of that time trying to navigate Mark's newfound supportive persona. He's been acting incredibly helpful, almost too much so, which I initially thought was his way of apologizing for the parent incident. I decided to give him one last test to see if he could actually redeem himself and prove he's capable of the growth I expected. I sat him down and told him that if he truly felt hurt or confused by my needs, we could consider closing the relationship again. However, there was a catch. He had to admit, out loud and clearly, that his previous stunt was caused by his own intimidation of my autonomy. I needed him to acknowledge that he was the problem, not my desire for exploration. But Mark, being as stubborn as ever, refused to take the bait. He just looked at me with those blank, safe eyes and told me he wasn't hurt at all. He said he had learned his lesson about the importance of my freedom, and that he actually wanted me to keep exploring. He even encouraged me to reach out to Julian again to set up a makeup date at a high-end restaurant downtown. I was skeptical, but he seemed so sincere that I thought, maybe, just maybe, the shock of the parents had finally jolted his brain into a higher gear. He actually helped me pick out an outfit for the date, a stunning backless dress that screams, independent woman. He even made the restaurant reservation for me because he said he wanted everything to be perfect for my big night. I felt a surge of hope. I thought I had finally broken through his shell of mediocrity. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early, feeling like the queen of my own destiny. I walked up to the hostess stand, ready to be whisked away to a secluded table where I could finally have the adult conversation I deserved with Julian. When I gave the hostess my name, she looked at the tablet, then back at me, and then back at the tablet with a very strange expression. She leaned in and asked, in a voice that was way too loud for the crowded lobby, "Are you here for the cheater party reservation?" I felt my face go hot as heads turned from every direction. People in the waiting area actually stopped talking to stare at me. I tried to correct her, saying it must be under my name, but she insisted, "No ma'am, the reservation for 2 was changed an hour ago to the cheater party, and it says here to seat you in the center of the dining room." I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer pettiness of it. Mark hadn't just made the reservation. He had branded me in front of a room full of strangers. I tried to call Julian to tell him to meet me elsewhere, but my calls went straight to voicemail. That's when I checked my iPad, which I had accidentally left unlocked at home in my rush to get ready. I saw a sent message to Julian from my account, sent while I was in the shower. It said, "Hey Julian, so sorry but I have to cancel. I just found out I have a highly contagious skin condition and I'm quite pustulant right now. Best to stay away." I wanted to vomit. Not only had Mark humiliated me at the restaurant, but he had also systematically destroyed my reputation with Julian using the most disgusting lie possible. Julian probably thinks I'm some kind of biohazard now. This wasn't a test. I had failed. It was a character assassination. Mark had used my trust and my lack of a passcode to treat me like a common criminal. He's not growing. He's just getting better at being a villain while wearing a nice guy sweater. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, ignoring the whispers and the snickers from the lobby. I drove home in a silent rage, ready to finally end this charade of a relationship. But when I got back, Mark was sitting on the couch, reading a book on healthy boundaries and acting as if he had no idea why I was home so early. When I confronted him about the restaurant and the iPad, he just shrugged. He said he thought the cheater party was a funny name for a celebration of my new lifestyle, and that the message to Julian was just a little joke among friends. He's gaslighting me with the same vocabulary I used to try and elevate him. He thinks that by calling his sabotage a joke, he can escape the consequences of his actions. It's such a low-budget theater performance, and I'm tired of being the only person in the audience who can see the strings. He's trying to make me look like the crazy one for being upset about his humor. It's a classic tactic of someone who knows they are outmatched intellectually. Now my parents are calling again because, apparently, Mark checked in with them to see if I was okay after my stressful night out. He's building a narrative where I'm falling apart and he's the only one holding the pieces together. It's brilliant in its cruelty, I'll give him. He's using my own social circle to isolate me. I'm not just losing my boyfriend. I'm losing my entire support system to his calculated kindness. I'm currently sitting in my office trying to figure out how to regain control of my own story. Every time I try to move forward, Mark finds a way to trip me up and then asks if I need a hand getting back up. It's a toxic cycle that he's disguised as a partnership. I'm not going to let him win, but it's becoming increasingly clear that I'm not just fighting for my autonomy. I'm fighting for my sanity. He's a parasite that's convinced the host it's actually a vitamin. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you keep testing him and then you're shocked when he passes with flying colors. You're literally giving him the blueprint on how to ruin you. Ops reply, constant testing is the only way to ensure quality in a partner. If Mark can't handle the pressure of my evolution without resorting to middle school pranks, he's the one who failed. Anonymous user 2 says the cheater party and the postulant text. Mark is a savage. I'm officially a fan of this guy. Ops reply, it's not savage, it's low-budget theater. It's the behavior of a man who knows he can't compete with my intellect, so he has to resort to character assassination to feel big. Update 3. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and the collapse of my life is now reaching a point of total structural failure. My parents have moved from concerned calls to a full-blown psychological assault. My inbox is currently flooded with forwarded copies of my purity certificates from my childhood church, along with links to articles about the dangers of secular narcissism. My mother even sent me a photo of my childhood bedroom, telling me she's kept it exactly the same, for when I inevitably come back to my senses. It's clear Mark has been feeding them a steady stream of concerning updates about my behavior, framing my search for growth as a complete mental breakdown. Mark himself hasn't raised his voice once. He's been eerily calm, which is the most passive-aggressive thing a human being can do. He just drifts through the apartment like a polite ghost, making small talk about the weather and asking if I've found any more architects lately. It's infuriating. I decided that the only way to break this stalemate was to force him to face his own immature jealousy head-on. I met a new guy, Liam, who's a performance artist and much more my speed. I decided to bring him directly to the house without any warning, hoping that a direct confrontation would finally make Mark snap and admit his feelings. I wanted to show Mark that I wasn't going to be intimidated by his little restaurant stunts or his calls to my parents. I walked into the apartment with Liam laughing and being purposefully loud, expecting to find Mark in his usual spot on the couch. But the living room was silent. And more than that, it was empty. Not completely empty, but the Mark-shaped parts were gone. All of his books, his hideous man cave posters, and even his favorite coffee mug were missing. It was as if he had been surgically removed from the space. I walked toward the kitchen, my heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and a strange sense of loss that I immediately suppressed. Liam stood by the door, looking confused, while I scanned the room for some kind of explanation. That's when I saw it. On the dining table, placed exactly where my $120 Cabernet used to sit, was a single, neatly printed document. It was a copy of my initial one-sided proposal that I had typed up for him weeks ago. But it wasn't just a copy, it was a certified version. At the bottom of the page, right below where I had outlined the logical necessity of my freedom, were two very familiar signatures. My mother's and my father's. But they signed it as witnesses of my evolution. There was also a small note from Mark written in the margin. I thought your parents should see how much work you've put into this. They were very impressed by your intellectual property. Good luck with the next stage. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He hadn't just left. He had turned my own words into a legal indictment in the eyes of my family. Mark didn't just move his things out. He had spent the last 2 weeks carefully planning his exit to ensure maximum damage. He didn't argue because he didn't need to. He had already won the trial in the court of my family's opinion. By showing them the actual proposal, he stripped away all my theme night excuses and showed them exactly who I was trying to be. He took my attempt at transparency and used it to burn every bridge I had. It was a cold, calculated move that showed a level of malice I didn't think he was capable of. Liam, sensing the radioactive levels of drama, made a quick excuse about an early rehearsal and practically ran out of the apartment. I didn't even try to stop him. I just stood there, holding that piece of paper, realizing that Mark had effectively weaponized my own ego against me. He didn't run away from the relationship. He conducted a tactical retreat after setting the entire base on fire. He's gone, and he's made sure I have nowhere to turn but back to the very parents he's convinced I'm unwell. The house feels cold and hollow, and for the first time I don't feel like the queen of anything. I feel like the victim of a very long, very cruel joke. Mark played the simpleton for years just to wait for the perfect moment to prove he was the one in control. It's a violation of everything a partnership is supposed to be. He didn't just break up with me, he attempted to delete my identity. I'm currently looking at the signatures on that paper, wondering how I'm going to explain this to my parents when they inevitably call to discuss my evolution. Mark has managed to make my most progressive ideas look like the ramblings of a spoiled child. He's not immature, he's a strategic nightmare. And I'm the one left standing in the wreckage of a life I thought I was curating. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says he left and took his stuff, but left the proposal signed by your parents? That is some high-level psychological warfare. Mark didn't just leave, he evaporated you. Ops reply, he ran away because he couldn't handle the responsibilities of being a partner to a complex woman. Leaving a paper behind is just his way of trying to have the last word because he knows he can't win a real debate. Anonymous user 2 says, are those signatures real? Did he actually sit down with your parents and have them sign your one-sided proposal? I can't stop laughing. Ops reply, it's a disgusting violation of my privacy and my intellectual property. He had no right to show them my private thoughts, let alone turn them into some kind of twisted legal document. It's predatory behavior. Update 4. It's been a month since my last update, and the silence from Mark is absolute. He's blocked me on every platform, changed his number, and according to mutual friends, he's already moved into a new place across town. I should be relieved to be rid of his simplicity, but the reality of my situation has finally caught up with me in the most brutal way possible. Yesterday, I received a call from my father, and for the first time in my life, he didn't sound concerned or disappointed. He sounded like a businessman closing a deal that was no longer profitable. My father, as I've mentioned before, manages my trust fund, the one that pays for this gorgeous apartment and my curated lifestyle. He told me that he and my mother had spent a lot of time reflecting on the document Mark shared with them. He said that if I am truly as mature and independent as I claimed to be in my proposal, then I am certainly mature enough to rewrite the rules of my own survival. He informed me that as of the end of this month, the trust fund is being suspended. He said it was time for me to face the natural consequences of the evolution I was so eager to pursue. I've lost my home, my funding, and the stable base I used to build my ego. Mark didn't just leave a void, he made sure the world I built to protect myself was the very thing that crushed me. He knew that by showing my parents that proposal, he wasn't just shaming me. He was cutting off my oxygen. He knew exactly where my power came from, and he handed the scissors to the people who were most likely to use them. I'm currently surrounded by half-packed boxes, trying to figure out how I'm going to pay for a studio apartment on my own, let alone the life I'm used to. Everything I thought was a sign of my superiority, my intelligence, my progressive ideas, my tests, they all look like cheap plastic now. Mark didn't fall for my traps. He just waited for me to walk into my own. He wasn't the immature one. He was the one who knew that real maturity involves understanding the weight of your choices. I thought I was playing chess while he was playing checkers, but it turns out he was just waiting for me to checkmate myself. It's a bitter, uncomfortable realization that I'm not the protagonist of some grand intellectual drama. I'm just a woman who talked herself into a corner. I'm currently drinking the very last of that $120 Cabernet, straight from the bottle because I've already packed the glasses. It tastes like vinegar and regret, and honestly, it's the most honest thing I've experienced in months. My mother called earlier to offer me my old room back, but only if I agree to structured counseling and a traditional path. The thought of going back to that suffocating life makes me want to scream, but the thought of being truly alone and broke is even worse. Mark didn't just take his stuff, he took my future and replaced it with a mirror I hate looking at. He won. Not because he was right, but because he was willing to be as ruthless as I pretended to be. He used my own transparency to expose the fact that I was building my freedom on someone else's dime. I'm packing up the silk robe and the books on sociology, and they feel like heavy, useless weights. I don't know where I'm going, but I know that Mark is out there somewhere, finally living a life that doesn't involve being my project. And the worst part is, I'm the one who gave him the idea to leave.